Good afternoon, dear Catherine, honored guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm deeply humbled to stand here before you all today. Tea has been a central theme for half of my life and a main element in my daily meditation practice for 20 years. I'm honored to be included in this esteemed community. It's obvious to me that tea has reached a place where it can and ought to be seen as a cultural movement. I'm here today not to offer charts and graphs and scientific information, but to reflect a very human element, which is at the core of the spirit of tea. And hopefully will reflect some of your own tea stories. In the face of our theme, sustainability and preservation, I would like to offer a simple message, which first of all is illustrated by this symbol at the front hanging here. That's the symbol of wa, harmony. And is also illustrated by the following quote from Morihei Ueshiba, the founder of Aikido, a Japanese martial art that is often referred to as the way of unifying spirit. Quote, "Mankind's role is to fulfill its heaven-sent purpose through sincere hearts that are in harmony with all people and all things." Unquote. I'd like to share with you a bit of my history with tea and weave the context of how someone like me ended up becoming a local tea farmer in California and a so-called man of tea. As a footnote, all the photos are mine, except the ones taken of me. So here we go. My journey of tea is one based in spirituality. It began really with my interest in meditation and Kriya Yoga. The book Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda had inspired me to travel to India, as seen here in 1998 at the Kumbh Mela in Hardwar, a spiritual pilgrimage festival of some 40 million people lasting many weeks. It's the largest gathering of any kind on the planet. One day as I walked back to camp, a group of gurus and sadhus, the holy saints of India, had blocked the road. They were all waving their arms and shouting, "Maharaj!" and demanded that I give them my camera to take my picture. After having spent 4 months in India, climbing into the Himalayas to the source of the Ganges River, and having the opportunity to drop in deeply with a few truly authentic gurus, I had infused my being with a lasting spiritual fire and initiated a simple yet profound daily meditation practice. It was in the same time frame that I had my first introduction to Gong Fu Cha. The tall gentleman wearing black was my tea initiator. He and I knew each other as musicians in the West Coast music scene. He served me my first pu'er, a bamboo-aged show. We sat in his beautiful lava rock garden on a simple platform surrounded by the jungles of the big island of Hawaii. It was a timeless moment. Everything was in slow motion, and I watched the details of his presentation as if my life depended on it. I could feel myself being changed instantly. The first sip of pu'er felt like a salve for my bones. Its taste and aroma were like coming home. From that moment forward, pu'er would become an integral part of my life and be included in my daily meditation practice. By the way, that's David Wright from Hidden Peak Teahouse in Santa Cruz. He and his family have been close friends for over 2 decades. In those days, I traveled extensively as a working musician, This is from a world tour we did, playing on a stage set up right on the Giza Plateau. I had devised a travel set that I always had carried on the plane and that could easily fit in a small backpack. I took it everywhere I went. It was always a big hit with the airport security. Who knew that wrapped pu'er bricks and tea utensils somehow got confused as drug paraphernalia? In the early 2000s, I met my first tea teacher. He was well-versed in Cha No Yu, Gong Fu Cha, and was an interesting cross between an eccentric hermit and a humble scholar. He had also been a resident tea master at Green Gulch back in the 70s. By the time I had met him, he was 72. I was his only student, and he loathed community attention. He requested from the very beginning that if anyone asked him about my studies with him, I could only refer to him as the old man. He coveted his anonymity. I would learn later on that this was a very traditional stance for many tea masters in former times. He taught me about the spiritual core of tea practice and expressly the 7 principles of tea: purity, sincerity, humility, simplicity, reverence, harmony, and tranquility, all of which naturally breed respect and presence in the moment. How would Western culture look if these aspects were instilled in society? I noticed that many of these same principles were part of my personal approach to music, and I saw the innate harmony between music and tea. Through my teacher, I discovered that there was a whole universe of culture surrounding classical tea. He introduced me to aloes wood incense and incense ceremony. He showed me the worlds upon worlds of tea ceramics. He had a particular interest in celadon. So I learned a lot about different kinds of celadons, like how to tell a Chinese celadon from a Korean celadon from a distance of 20 feet. I eventually became a celadon collector as well. This is an antique Korean celadon bowl, about 5 inches in diameter. The old man taught me about scroll paintings and the metaphors of their imagery. This is a 400-year-old painting from the Teahouse school. Very rare, also from my collection. He taught me about calligraphy and how to recognize Chinese works versus Japanese ones. This is a recent acquisition I did recognize immediately as Chinese, and may in fact be a highly valuable example of the famous Chinese artist Shi Banqiao from the Qianlong period. My teacher taught me about tea history and about Chinese poetry, waka, and haikus. He was also a great storyteller. He introduced all the varieties of tea to me, as well as guiding me on my service techniques, posture, movement, and attitude. He wasn't subtle about it either. Often I would get the master's staff in the form of shouts and hard blows to my ego. Slowly, I began to recognize patterns in nature reflecting my tea practice, and to look closely at the supposed little things in life, like the balance of life, as seen in this seabird dropping. And I became more and more aware of the harmony weaving my life, my music, and tea. I developed a scholar studio and tea room to accommodate more and more guests who started to come to sit with me for tea. In the early 2000s also marked a historic time for my music career with the birthing of our band, Hamsa Lila. We ended up having a debut album that hit the top of national world music charts and headlined many events and festivals, including a 7-year stint at Burning Man, doing crazy all-night-long performances without breaks. I always had my tea ready on the floor nearby to save me from fully collapsing during those dusty marathon gigs. Eventually, my own solo career started evolving. It was at this time that I met Ahmed Rahim, the owner of Numi Tea, who's been a dear friend now for 15 years. He's actually a very talented musician himself, and he has a beautiful singing voice. My tea practice was deepening, and visions were beginning to come during my tea meditations. I was 48 years old, no kids, never been married, and had wondered if I was meant to ever have a family of my own. Prior to music tour in New Zealand in 2009, I had a very distinct vision that I would meet my future wife and that she would be Japanese. What was I to think? My Zen studies had taught me to empty my mind. An international campout event in New Zealand's South Island. I was surprised to see lots of Japanese women there, but not one of whom seemed appropriate, and I just observed from a very safe distance. But on the final day that I was there, in total surprise, arriving to camp right near me, there she was. I invited her to a welcoming tea. This is an historic photo took at that moment, which I only saw for the first time just recently. I was immediately stricken. I fell in love with her that day. It was as if we'd known each other for lifetimes. Later that same year, we were married in an old Buddhist temple that somehow happened to be surrounded by hundreds of acres of tea in the mountains near Kagoshima, Japan. I felt life once again taking me through a gateway, and my world of tea would be entering a whole new era. It was like I was this koi fish happily floating in the water of life and had entered a very dreamy stage. We visited very often many temples and dreamlike places. Historic gardens and temples, like this one, the Silver Temple in Kyoto. My learning about Japanese history and about tea culture is woven into how Japanese culture is woven into society on so many levels was profound. This shot was taken at Daitokuji Temple in Kyoto, the temple that figures prominently in the history of Japan, in the tea history of Japan, especially relative to Senno Rikyu, the tea master whose influence in tea can still be felt deeply today. I was very humbled by the way the Japanese did everything and how well they had preserved their culture and their treasures. Decades of American life and culture were beginning to peel away. On March 11, 2011, Japan sustained a triple disaster, earthquake, tsunami, and the Fukushima catastrophe. My wife's hometown of Sendai was at the epicenter of the tsunami and earthquake. Many seaside towns were instantly wiped off the map. I had fundraising concerts in the States and had brought donations to survivors and communities there who'd been put in prefab housing complexes. I was given a chance to offer free concerts at some of them, and interestingly enough, at the thing that they called tea gatherings, where they would meet in community center buildings as the highlight of their day. I shared smiles and tears with these beautiful souls who had lost their entire communities, homes, careers, and family members. I felt honored to be able to give them a little bit of inspiration. Back in the States, I settled into my married life. My wife turned out to be a professional chef trained in Japan, as well as a certified permaculture designer with 2 green thumbs. We had an abundant garden, and our marriage was blossoming. We were ready for the next step. We made a conscious choice to have a child. Our daughter Marama was born the weekend of the summer solstice on the full moon, the super full moon. In our living room, a water birth with a great midwife standing by with 10 of her own kids. Mysteriously, the moment I cut the umbilical cord, it started to rain. My life was changed forever. I realized for the first time what it really meant to be a human being living on the earth. I also understood that good tea equals happy, healthy mama and a joyful, fat cherub. A short poem of mine illustrates life's changes for me then. In the window, a red sun rising. Tea kettle sings softly, timeless, wafting incense. Oh, the baby! My tea practice was deepening and becoming much more refined with this new life perspective. More and more people were coming to sit. I began to host tea gatherings by donation. I started to dream one day of owning our own place and make a tea retreat center. This photo was a space recreated in our backyard at that time. I was regularly seeing people each week for tea. It was becoming an occupation. My music career had slowed down while tea had begun to bring in a steady, small stream of income. I felt these two worlds of mine needed to connect. With my decades of being in the world music arena, I had friendships with several great music masters. I had always dreamed of doing a concept album. This became that album. Each song is a different master musician playing his instruments with no accompaniment, very spacious and cinematic. I finished it in under 4 months, feeling that I had achieved some kind of rite of passage, having directly harmonized my two worlds of tea and music. Alam Khan, son and heir of the great Ali Akbar Khan, is a featured performer. More and more, my community was urging me to open a public tea space. In the spring of 2014, I got a phone call about a for rent sign in downtown Nevada City. I liked the space, but didn't have the money to start a business like that. The next thing I knew, people had taken up a collection and actually gifted me the funds to make it happen. It was a shocking and exciting and scary time. What did I know about the tea business? In a 170-year-old printer's building, the business that had moved out was called Scotch Broom. While prying the old shop's letters off the building, I had to take a break to readjust the ladder. A stranger walked by, looking up at me from a distance. "Oh, you're opening a tea room." "How did you know?" I said. "Well, look." So I came down from the ladder, and I was amazed. It said tea room. I just left it up till just before we opened the shop. The interior needed some help. The old bricks were crumbling, but the feng shui seemed good. This is what it looked like just after we opened. Jade Summit Fine Tea and Antiques was a one-man operation, and I was that lucky one. People often commented how lovely of a job my wife had done decorating the place. I would just smile and nod. People didn't expect that I would be the person that would do such a thing. This was our 4.5 mat space. It was my preferred area for the tea service. It was quite a learning experience. Here, my daughter at 3 years old was insisting on learning how to serve tea. She loves pu'er. After opening the shop, I decided I'd better go to China, finally, and hug a pu'er tree. Here in Yunnan, this nice boy's family had been pu'er forest farming for 600 years. He took us up to their forest and to the tea king of Nanuoshan, this junior elder of a tree, only 800 years and counting. Their family forest zone was just around the corner from here. What I saw didn't look at all like a tea farm, but rather like a forest in harmony with its surroundings. Meeting seasoned tea farmers and real tea masters, not the online certified kind, was a real treasure. Here we are in Taipei at the famed Wisteria Teahouse. That's the owner, Master Joyu, second from the right. Joyu asked me at one point with a distraught look if I thought the spirit of tea had been hurt somehow by its manipulations and propagation over the years. I considered his question very carefully and took a sip and said, "I think tea is a conscious being and knows exactly what it's doing. It seems to be working with us and through us, not the other way around. And then I added, Master Joyu, you have brought so much beauty to so many people with tea. We're all playing our role in the unfolding of its history. His concern subsided and his face brightened, and we proceeded to drink one of the most incredible shangpuers I've ever had from a 2,000-year-old tree, hand-harvested and prepared by this master sitting directly across from me, Master Xian. One of my dearest and greatest teachers is Master Tsai from Taiwan. He's a great proponent of organic tea farming practices throughout Taiwan and China. Some of the most delicious tea I've ever had comes from his productions. All the input I was getting from these masters really added immeasurable depth to my practice and helped me adapt new techniques of serving and drinking. I personally haven't tried this one, though. Going deep into tea meditation in the fall of 2015, I saw a huge wave coming. And then our son Naya was born on the full moon of the winter solstice weekend, also at home in the water with the same midwife standing by. Little did I know that the wave I had seen coming was also going to fall from the sky and into my tea shop. We got flooded out from an intense rain that happened during January of 2017. We had to do an emergency evacuation of all the tea and antique furniture. I was in total shock. We ended up having to close our storefront for good. We weren't insured for natural floods. I lost my business, my income, and my livelihood. I needed a solution, and I dove into my tea bowl as never before. I felt the universe working through tea was presenting me with an opportunity. The disaster was no disaster. It was a blessing. We had moved to a beautiful location near town only a few months before losing the shop, just down the street from the local high school, the local community college, and a major food co-op. It has great front garden viewing areas, partially landscaped in a wild permaculture style, and a perfect porch for meditating and drinking tea. Lovely maples for autumn magnificence, flowering fruit trees sprinkled around the buildings, and even a small structure wonderfully suited as a standalone tea house, surrounded by huge moss-covered boulders. Of course, then there was the back of the property that opens to a huge field edged by an ancient oak tree, and enough shaded space under the oak to comfortably sit a small crowd. Fields and flowers adjacent to a sprinkling of forested areas. A river at the bottom of the property with lots and lots of wildlife, and the rare wild cutie patootie. Our 2-year-old resident master, Naya, showed me his special technique for tuning into nature. Our little nature valley location had everything we needed to birth a new project. And Jade Valley came into being then. We could do tea retreats, events, and create courseworks for the local schools and community college, and host regular meditation retreats. And we even figured out how to create an independent retreat room through Airbnb with its own private entry and bathroom. But there was still the question of my supposed tea business career. I had stopped really making any money with music with the advent of Spotify. Tea events weren't going to pay the bills. I thought, puer used to be used as currency. What about creating a new token based on the tea industry? So we started to create Teacoin. But doing a major ICO and organizing that takes time and money, and we needed something more substantial and sooner. So this went on the back burner. I needed to go further inward for answers, and I was watching the dragon's breath roll off the surface of the tea, and I started to get a reading on something. A message was coming through. An idea was blossoming. Suddenly, I thought about the ancient tea farms I'd visited in Japan that were also cold weather areas. Also similar vegetation, altitude, and foothill mountains. In many ways, the areas surrounding those old farms looked a lot like our neighborhood. For several years, I had also been sourcing tea from an ancient tea farm in central Japan. And its climate, altitude, soil, and water were also similar to our place. That's snow in between the hedgerows. Mike Fritz had been coming to my tea and meditation mini retreats, and we had become good friends. His tea farm had been going like gangbusters for 7 years. His soil, air, altitude, and native plant ecosystem were the same as ours. And he was also getting super high prices for his award-winning tea. I talked with Mike last night, and he's really sorry he couldn't be here with us today. He sends his regards. He's at home taking care of his wife, who had come down with pneumonia. Meeting Mike and seeing his success was the last sign that I needed. Start a plantation was what the tea seemed to be saying to me. I tracked down some organic tea starts and ordered several hundred plants. As I prepared our land to receive the plants, the tea was talking to me again and saying that it wanted to be propagated in our region in the old way, in the boutique artisan tradition that it had historically been done for centuries. So we cleared away the blackberries and tilled the soil. We did some basic tests to see what the main composition was and how well it drained. We brought in an expert for this, who seemed really happy to be paid in cookies. It turned out to be clay heavy, but mineral rich. From my research, this seemed to be just fine, as long as we added organic matter, sand, manure, and wood chips, and made sure we had good drainage. And then in October of last year, 2017, we planted. This is us doing a little ceremony to kick off the historic moment. And we staggered the planting to allow maximum room for roots to expand between plants. We built up the furrows using first gravel for drainage, then straw, then some manure, then compost, and ended up creating little mounds that will eventually be made into contiguous berms for each row. It took us about 3 weeks to complete phase 1 of our plantation. The tea seemed to take very well. The leaves showed a nice lush green waxiness. A little browning of the new shoot tips appeared. Mike Fritz said he had experienced the same thing and not to worry about it. Overall, it seemed to have been a successful first stage, and the plants seemed very happy. And we added chips and straw for mulch and made a nice winter-ready bed for them to snuggle up in. Our boss was making sure he had enough compost for the top dressing, and he sent in his heavy equipment to haul out the excess boulders. We have lots of decomposed and solid granite in our area. Tea appears to love the mineral-rich native soil. We had plenty of post-planting buds come out. They seemed healthy and fragrant. Even the bugs were celebrating with us. A great tea farmer in Taiwan growing organic Oriental Beauty once told me that if bugs like it, it's a sign of good tea. Here's a happy leaf. And some others. We finished our phase 1 planting within about 3 weeks and 300 plants. And we had lots of new buds popping out after the planting, and also a new idea was also popping out as well. Many friends in our area showed great interest in what we were doing and wanted to do the same. We discovered that our foothill region shares a similar climate, soil, water quality, and altitude. And there were hundreds of potential tea farmers with land and infrastructure already in place to jump in the tea growing circle. Dozens of landowners have approached us with interest in being part of the tea growing movement. The timing of this is especially poignant considering the rapidly shifting scenario in another local boutique agricultural industry that our area is well known for. The next thing I knew, we were expanding our little farm to include an entire regional network of boutique artisan farms spanning 4 counties as an organizing co-op, with already several dozen farmers waiting in the wings to begin, and many, many more with increasing curiosity and interest. We are gathering momentum and interest day by day. And as a part of the larger picture, we're also developing our Academy of Classical Arts, a retreat center, a tea lifestyle products division, and a cultural outreach program in the schools. Investors are lining up, venture capitalists are sending inquiries, and a stellar business team has been self-assembled. Mike Fritz is on our board of directors with us as well. Roy Fong has also agreed to help connect us with seeds. Amazing things are underway. And we begin it all with a fully conscious approach to produce the highest quality tea products possible and create a world worthy of handing over to our children. We have a top permaculture master on the project who is our regenerative ag advisor, who's already in the process of designing our soil systems and distribution. Things are happening rapidly, and I find myself suddenly thrust into a new position as CEO of this new entity, and have realized that now I've become an accidental tea executive. What a strange and interesting world. It seems that my wife's concern now of how I'll earn a living for our family might be finally relieved. A prominent person in the tea industry said to me recently, very directly, that he was certain California will grow the world's best tea if it's done right. And this really is the point. With a harmonic approach, with a focus on quality and not quantity, California tea will lead the world once again in agriculture. But this time, it has the opportunity to do it right from the start. Not by monocropping or using life-poisoning pesticides and GMOs, but by applying regenerative methods to rehabilitate the land and ecosystems that humanity has destroyed by greed and devastating industrialist techniques. If we want to have a planet at all to grow and drink tea in, we have to look very seriously at each one of our lifestyles very closely and begin to shift towards simplicity immediately and forget about convenience and luxury. Ecological alarms are going off all over the world. Drastic times require drastic measures. A new tea movement that could include cultivation as a central element will radiate a powerful message to the planet that we can learn from our mistakes as humans and set the world right again. I stand before you all in this moment to say that I have listened to the tea, and I have heeded its call. Its message is simple. Be in harmony as a real community. Be in harmony with the earth. Grow tea as if you were the tea tree. Feed it pure water. Give it rich, organic soil. Treat it with love. And then you'll have the best tea the world has ever known. And our children will have a world worth inheriting.